Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast, the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education. The goal is to provide meaningful conversation to what is currently happening in our classrooms. Stories, pains, moments of success. We want to hear it all. Hey friends, welcome back to Under the Hat podcast. I am so excited today. And I just know that we are going to learn so much because we get to have a guest who she's done so much work. I'm a big fan. I am low key intimidated because I know that she knows so much, but I'm definitely here for it with respect to what we're going to talk about and what we're going to learn. So, if you've not met her, Rachelle Dené Poth is here with us. And I'm not even going to do my normal intro stuff. I want to get right into the conversation because I know it's going to be so rich, so cool. We'll do all the under the hat logistical stuff at the end. But how are you, my friend?
Fantastic. And did you see my face when you made that comment? I was like, "What? Are you sure?" No, I'm great. I'm excited to be here and love what you're doing and the other guests that you've had and the conversations and everything. And so those of you listening now or later, make sure you subscribe and listen and tune in because it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to also connect with other educators from all around the world. And that's just like how you keep learning and keep going. And so I'm excited to be here with you and to chat under the hat.
Yes. And so if you are listening right now live, feel free to drop whatever it is in the chat in terms of where you are, where you're from, any questions that you may have. We're super keen to hear what you all have to share as well. And if you catch it sometime in the future, again, subscribe, go to those places like Under the Hat. I know that we're all going to share our handles, our contact to continue the conversation. So Rachelle, please, I know there's so many people out there that have seen you online, have done your thing. And little story here. So when I was still in the classroom full time, my district had an initiative of having a cohort of I don't want to say top users, but teachers that were really passionate about ISTE standards and ed tech in general. So they kind of built out this little cohort of us to learn about ISTE standards, to learn and read. And we then funneled that information out. And I was a part of that group. And so one of the things that we did was we reread this guy right here. Rochelle, that was my first time being
it's right there.
Yep, there it is. And it was my first time. We kind of read it, and I don't know if you remember this, but I believe they brought you in. We kind of did almost like a study, book read kind of thing. So you didn't know me at the time probably, but I was a part of that group and learned from you then. And I remember just reading it and thinking wow, because we see the ISTE standards, see what they are, right? But what I appreciate about this book, and I know you've written others, is the actionable stuff that's in it. Not this is how you do the standard, but no, actually seeing the real examples, kind of what your take is on them and the variety of different ways that you can take those standards and use them with your students. So that little nugget of information in mind, Rachelle, if people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about your context, right? Where you came from, where you are, and a little bit about where you're headed.
Well, I don't know where I'm headed at this point. I always say I don't know what I want to be or do when I grow up. And I mean, I'm fully grown at this point, but I've had an interesting experience. If you would have told me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I'm not going to go beyond that at this point, what I would be doing, I'd be like, no, are you serious? There's no way. But I had a great upbringing. My parents, super supportive. always encouraging me. I joke about this because I'm like, yeah, I never had the games of like Chutes and Ladders, or like I never had some of those like cool, just for fun toys. I had all of the strategy and things, but I always loved learning. And back in, I don't want to say what century it was, I went to school for the majority, but it was always fun to just learn, even if I didn't do well in things. But what I learned from that is that, it's okay, like, to make mistakes and to take risks. But even in knowing that, when I went to my undergrad at Penn State, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was in the College of Liberal Arts, and my junior year, they said, you need to declare a major. I said, I thought I did. I thought like liberal arts was the major. It was key to some career. And they're like, no, it's a college. It's a building, part of the whole college. And I was like, oh. So I got into teaching, and I didn't really think I would be in teaching that long. And ironically, now all these years later, I'm teaching Spanish, which I took French in high school and college. And then I never got a master's. So I went to law school while teaching full time. And I credit my experience with law school with the reason I'm still in the classroom, because I got back into being a student, the challenges. I saw the value of teacher-student relationships and the power of mentoring. And it's just been interesting. And I did go back and get the master's in tech, and now I'm finishing up the doctorate. But people often say, oh, well, you're an attorney. Do you practice? I said, well, it comes in handy in the classroom sometimes, and it helps you to think through different perspectives. I mean, just like side note, this is totally related to your question, but minimally. But one of the courses was forensic sciences. Or forensic science. And I had a student this is years ago, and I actually wrote about this experience in one of my books about like really getting to know students. But there was, we have linoleum floors, and there was this crayon that looked like a truck had run over it into the floor. And the angle at which it was, I'm like, it didn't just roll. So nobody wanted to say claim for it. And I don't like to leave messes for people. So I was trying to clean it up. But like, legitimately, you could not get that cleaned up. And so I said to the student, what happened? Well, it just dropped. And I said, yeah, but it wouldn't do that. And I said, okay, I'm going to guess what I think would happen. I think it did drop and it rolled, and you were too lazy to get up, and you took your foot and you pulled it back, and the closer it got, the deeper ingrained in the tile it went, and got closer. And he was like, how'd you know that? I said, forensic science.
That's great. That's great.
It was just like a funny conversation, but my motto is just always about like learning and opportunities. And, I mean, I went to law school when I was, 20 years ago, almost at this point, but I don't practice officially. I keep up the degree, but it comes in handy in so many different ways. I mean, just the way you think, the confidence level, stories to tell to students, who I became as a person, who I'm still becoming as a person. But my whole inspiration is just, what can I do to make it easier for others, to help others and support others, and whatever it is. And if I don't know the answers, then I'm going to go find the answers. So I'm going to do what Melody McAllister said. I'm put on my listening lips right now. She always says, I'm going to stop talking.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah. So So I was kind of interested in that. If you were still practicing, because I've seen you on other shows, and we listen to so many podcasts, and
I know.
Does she still practice? And so I did know that about you. And in terms of like your education and your background, super impressive.
Right.
And also like your work as an author, right? Well, before I get to that, I guess I should say, like, you're still in the classroom, right? And,
I am.
And you're still doing that work, right? But you seem to find time to be also on the on the professional learning side, right?
Right.
I see you out at conferences. So I guess my first question is like, what kind of motivated you from, hey, I'm in the classroom, to wanting, or have that desire to spread that knowledge, to spread your experiences with others?
How much time do you have for this answer?
Well, we have we're 10 minutes in.
No.
So, and maybe that's a loaded question, but I don't know. What maybe one memory, or like one thought.
I mean, there's a progression of it, but I can condense it. So,
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
I mean, number one, I usually say whenever I'm out, like, I really don't like public speaking, but yet I've done, so many different presentations, someone just in a presentation room or some like on a big stage, like at ISTE last summer, but there's a difference when you speak about something that you're really passionate about or that you've seen make a big difference in your classroom. That kind of gives you the courage to do that. But this goes back probably 10 years. I remember, PD sessions always, we're in groups. It's like, okay, who wants to volunteer and, present for your group? I'm like, not it. I will post up the notes on the wall, not do anything. But they had these two seventh graders present this one year and standing in the front of a room full of educators. And I remember thinking, like, I would not want to be them. And they were just super calm. And then that's the first time in my teaching career that it occurred to me, I'm asking my students to stand in the front and present to their classmates. And I couldn't understand why they didn't want to do that when they're in there and they talk to each other all the time. But then I'm like, I get it. So I decided to submit my students. We just started to use a lot of the different digital tools. And I said to my students, hey, there's a conference coming up. I'm going to have, we're talking about tools. Why don't you present at the student showcase? And then they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to stay on the side, just help you if you need it. And they went, well, it's not really the same thing. So I put in to do a session. And I remember I was so nervous. It was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And the kids went first. And then I went to my session. Of course, nothing worked. I didn't know you should download it as a PowerPoint first, just in case rule. And they're in the back of the room sending me, like hearts and like, you got this kind of thing. But it opened my eyes to that. Like if I ask students to do something, it should be something that I'm prepared to do myself. So that was the first experience. And then every year after that, there were like 2 events each year. We went, and it used to be that I would say, oh, well, we do project-based learning. And then I would introduce a student and they would talk about a tool and why they liked it or how it made a difference. But the same group of students, we traveled together like 4 and in some cases 5 years, that their senior year, I mean, I had seen these students go from not holding their head up to holding their head up to still being nervous to, I just said, hi, my name is, and I introduced myself. These are my students. They're going to present to you. And I stood at the side. And that just it inspired me and it motivated me. I was just like, this is awesome to find opportunities for students. But because of the way they challenged me and me, like, okay, I could talk about this, realizing, I'm talking about what the students are doing and what the benefit is for them. And I'm excited about it. And I know the challenges that teachers face with, there's so many things that we have to deal with. And so that combination of those things gave me some confidence to put myself out there more, where before that I was like, yep, nope, not doing it. And there were a couple times where I was like, I think I'm just going to back out of this because I was too nervous. And I thought, what example does that set? And the rest is kind of history at that point, but it was because of the kids. And I have them on my intro slide. They've contributed to a couple of my books. And crazily enough, some of them, they're getting married. They're already, after the first 4 years of college and other things now. And then you look like, oh my gosh, where has the time gone? But, had it not been for the law school experience and for those students that most of which called me mom, which at first I was like, and then after that I was like, okay. All right. And one of them, her birthday is today. And I remember having a surprise birthday celebration for her when she turned 16 at the conference, and she turned 23 today. So it's like, it's all about the relationships and everything and the support system that you have in place, whether it's with teachers or whether it's with you and students, that really does go a long way to support. So I tried to condense that, but it's just, I don't know what a difference it can make.
Yeah, no, a lot of that resonates with me, right? Or no, all of it resonates with me. Just this idea that, like, for me, I recognize that the school year would start and, they don't trust you yet. And
right.
Stacy, Rashawn, and I like we talked about that the other night, but like this idea of like, we have to build that trust with them. Mm-hmm. And so students would enter the room like in August, and they had like this notion of what school is, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this, like, and they hate it, like they hate it. And I remember, like, I knew that I was onto something when, like, a couple months in, when students were like, "Wait, I don't want to leave this room. Like, I want to stay here because
Mm-hmm.
A, I feel safe, and B, they would tell me, they're like, the way we're learning, it like it breaks the stigma, as they used
Yeah.
to say. Like it like this feels, because like we're both similar in the sense, like, we really engage students with the PBL process. We
Mm-hmm.
really use things like, putting their passions first, right? Like, I know in in the book that I read of yours, like, you spend time talking about Genius Hour. And when I
Mm-hmm.
read that, I was like, hey, I do Genius Hour, and kind of seeing like, oh, like others are doing this, but I felt alone at my school because I felt like I was the only one doing it. And I was just like, wait, is this the right thing? Is this like, is it I know students are happy, but are they academically succeeding? And now, like, in hindsight, I'm like, the answer is yes, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
they're learning more than just how to memorize something for
Right.
a test, let's say. Um, so yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. I know that things have changed in the last couple years, right? Like, I know that you're kind of have spoken kind of a little bit on the forefront. Not a little bit. Looks like you're completely on the forefront of, like, what's going on with AI. Um, and that's such a, I don't know, heavy topic.
Yeah.
Um, how is how has that changed the work that you've been doing over the last couple years?
Oh my gosh. It's amazing because I actually a little bit earlier today, or if you're not listening now, like at some point before this podcast, I did a 1 hour session on AI, and I had just been at IdeaCon, and talking about AI when I started and why I started. And it was August, September of 2017. I started to do some research. I wrote an article that came out on getting smart in January of 2018. And I mean, I was amazed back then. I mean, I had no idea how much AI was, in everyday life, and just continued to do research. I took the course with ISTE, I think that summer, and I dove right into teaching. And I submitted a session to FETC. I think it was the first one that I did a presentation.
Mm,
And I was super nervous because, just starting, there's so much to know. But I went at it at an angle of, okay, this is what I did in my classroom, and how I started with my students, because a lot of teachers were in, I mean, the attendance was great because it was something that was different and new.
yeah.
But teachers were still a little bit hesitant, like, well, I don't know if it's going to stick around. I'm like, well, it's been around since like last century, and I don't know if it's going away. And I said, surprisingly, it's a lot of what we rely on in an everyday basis. But for the first 5 years, there were a few people presenting on it. And I don't even know how many presentations on it. And the first one I did was like, AI in education, what do educators need to know? And that was like nothing spectacular about, the title. I just made it up. But then here comes ChatGPT, end of December, well, end of November, beginning December 2022, and then it's like, what do we do? Like, we can't teach anymore and everything, and it's like, it's impacting everybody. And then now, the past year, people are still curious about it. The number of apps that are available. I mean, just the other day on that, there's an AI app for that. There's 11,700 apps that are available, not all specific to education, but people are creating them. And it's scary. I did a workshop the other day, and I always say the same question at the beginning, like, what do you think of when you think of AI? And I've like the top three answers in my mind are that I've heard over the years are Terminator, Skynet, and like an Alexa, and that's it. And
Yeah.
I mean, my session is made as soon as somebody goes Terminator from the back. And last year, for the past year, most time it's been ChatGPT, or it's been the name of a tool. But I did a session today, I did a session the other day, and the session I did earlier today, I always ask the question on survey, how many of you have used ChatGPT or some other large language model? And in December, even this past year, in the sessions I'd done, it was like around 70 or 80% had not a year in. And I just found that to be so surprising. Now, today it was like a 50-50 split. But even things like PD, I added that question in because my dissertation is focused on artificial intelligence and the need for professional development in general, but specific to emerging technologies like this that are coming at us so fast, that are really making us rethink our instruction and what we do in the classroom. But also, we have to be like hyper aware of why students need skills in these areas, because the jobs, I mean, that could be a whole other episode. But even today, 50 had not used it, a big concern about it. But it's still exciting, and it's surprising at times at, some people really haven't explored it. And I get that, because there's so many things that we do that take up a lot of time, and it can be thought of like, oh, it's just another thing. Or I don't know where to begin. That's another problem too, because especially coming from, COVID teaching and shutdown. I said this like 5 times in the last couple of days. I said, I felt like, even though, and like you knew all of the different digital tools, but when you went virtual, it was like, I don't even think I know how to teach anymore, because you're so used to the space you're in. And then you
Yeah.
go back to your classroom, you're like, what am I supposed to do now? So it has been really interesting. There clearly, there's a lot of concern about it, especially when it comes to, the privacy and the data and all of the information, like where's it going? And everybody knows, Google, you drive by a store and the next thing you know on your timeline, it's like, you stopped. I'm like, I did not even set foot in that place. Like, why? I'm not giving it a review. I didn't set foot there. So, but it's fun to do the sessions, to talk to teachers, to use the survey to see where they are with their comfort level, what their concerns are, what tools they're already using, and then to try to find a way to make them feel like calmer. Because the other day, the woman's like, her first words were danger, danger, when she thinks of AI. And I'm like, okay, I can see that. And she also gave a double hands up when I asked about, are you concerned about like academic integrity and critical thinking loss and all of that? And I said, maybe we can get like a 1.5 hands. So I don't know. What about you?
I mean, I think that like it's important that we hear from individuals like yourself that understand the nuance of it, and
Yeah,
not, because I kind of seen that too, right? Of like, oh, everyone should be using AI, and here's why,
right.
without almost like have having the maybe the negative effects, or like absent of that conversation, or you know
Hmm.
presentation, or whatever it is.
Right.
So for me, it's like, okay, cool, like we have this thing, and it is going to be more widely used.
Hmm.
I think often, having a child of my own now, she's 7. So I'm
Okay.
like, okay, so by the time she's in industry,
Yeah.
or shoot, even in high school, like what is that going to, and I'm mostly just curious. Like, I'm like in my head nerding out about it. I'm like, what is, like, where are we headed? Um
Yeah.
and but so like right now though, like, and I'm curious what you think about this, because like, so far from my vantage point, what I've seen is like the AI talking points fit in like 2 buckets,
Hmm.
and not in a third bucket all the time. And so the first bucket is like productivity. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
so AI, so here's the productivity tools. An example of one was, I came across one on my thread, like on Facebook or somewhere, where
Hmm.
it's like, it's this app you download that is like in the background while you're listening to a podcast, and then it takes
Hmm.
notes on that
Yeah.
episode for you. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And,
Yeah.
and I'm like, my wife was like, oh, we should do that with one of your episodes. I'm like, no, I don't want to know what notes are we taking on what I have to say. So it's like stuff like that, right? Like the
Hmm.
productivity side of it. And so like, to me, that's kind of that's the first bucket. The other
Hmm.
bucket is like creating, whether it's good or bad, right? Like the cheating,
Right.
the
Right.
generating images that we should not be generating, right? As a society.
Yeah.
The third bucket, though, I don't hear enough about, and maybe you can help me out with that, is like, I don't hear enough of like how it's purposefully can be used for like meaningful instruction, like
Yeah.
the pedagogy, the like, and that's where, and maybe it's just not there yet, but we
Hmm.
spend so much time talking about how to make teachers' lives easier with AI, which, don't get me wrong, that should be a thing. That's cool. Um,
Right.
but not enough about like, the substance of it, of how it can be used instructionally. And maybe I'm off base on that.
Yeah, no, that is a big concern because when I use my survey, I say, what are some concerns you have? And a lot of them, one, don't know where to start. Two, the concerns are the cheating and all those types of things. But when it
Mm.
comes to um, what you just asked, it's I think it's specific to well, not that I think it is specific to what grade level, what your role is in education. And so I try to, like the survey that I used for today's session that I did, I mean, the majority of the teachers were elementary. There were a few middle school and very
Mm.
few high school. And so then, I make the shift. And that's why I use that, because I think, okay, you're dealing with students who may be pre-K, kindergarten, and you want them to learn about it. So what are some things that you can do? And I had an activity where it was like the 10 most common everyday uses of AI. So, okay, give yourself a point for every one of the 10 that you use or that you see being used in your classroom. Okay, so there's a stepping point. Then now discuss them. Well, what are the benefits? Well, what are the concerns? I mean, that is like an easy activity, but there are also some tools out there that um, one of which that I found out about a couple of months ago. It's actually based out of Germany. And so they're in the process of kind of converting it over into English, more content, but it's pretty neat. You can uh, create basically a space where students can go in and they can explore and interact with AI in different ways. I mean, one example is kind of similar to what ChatGPT does. So they could ask it questions. And there are some other categories, and a teacher can then, turn off or, like, oh, today we're just doing this one. So the kids get to actually experience it. Even something like School AI is another one that has spaces, and you can create your own space where you basically tell, what your prompt is. And the better your prompt is, of course, we know the whole prompt engineering, it's going to lead to a better learning experience for students. And so when students do that, they're interacting with AI in a space that is safe, that the teacher then, through the classroom experience, has access to see what that transcript is. So you might have, students read a book, for example. And so you create this space where students are going to either engage in a conversation with a character from the book, or they're going to show what they have learned by answering questions from the chat bot, that are being generated, and see what their learning is. And in any of those that offer something similar, what's neat about it is it checks the student's level of understanding. It also reminds them of the importance of being, responsible and safe and ethical online, because they're answering and they know that the teacher has access to that. But they're also getting a more personalized learning experience. It's adapting to what their needs are in real time. And so, hypothetically speaking, I always pick photosynthesis. I don't know why, but it's just my go-to for, I don't even know. Every single conference I do, I'm like, let's go photosynthesis. But I think it's like the visual thing, right? Because I pictured the sun and the plants and all of that.
Yeah.
But, let's say the kids are learning about photosynthesis and they don't understand, what's involved in it, or the, periodic table of elements and what the symbols are for carbon dioxide or something like that. And so the teacher creates a space where they want the students to talk about photosynthesis. And then the students are going to be asked the question, because the, ChatGPT in this case, which is really not, but it's whatever tool you're using, is going to say, hi, we've been learning about photosynthesis. Do you know what that is? And then the student might type in plant, and that's it. And then it's going to go off of that and go, okay, so you said plant, which is great because plants are involved, but can you tell me a little bit more about it? So in that experience, the teachers are able to see and gain insight into what the students are learning. And when a kid just says plant, they're like, all right, we have to extend this. But the kids, if that's all they say, kids are hesitant to admit that even adults are hesitant to admit that they don't know something, right? You're like, oh, yeah, okay. But they're
Yeah.
getting that conversation. So it will adapt. And if all they say is plant, then it might say, well, there's plants and there's this. Can you figure out what the connection is? And I'm just making this up off the cuff, but it'll adapt as the students respond and engage them in a conversation, at the end of which then, depending on the tool and the functionalities, that teacher might see like, all right, like I got 30 kids in this class and like 17 of them, the only thing they said was plant. So clearly I got to go back, or, I got 10 that said sun, and I got to go back and revisit this, and it targets the instruction better. But there are a lot more that are designing experiences like that so that the kids can learn how to use these tools responsibly, um, and interact with them, because the reality of it is whenever they get out into the real world, and whether that's furthering their education. And I get excited, so I talk fast too. I told somebody the other day, I said, if I talk too fast, tell me to slow down. Nobody said a word. And at the end, somebody said, you talk really fast. I go, you didn't tell me to slow down. She said, no, I kept up. But
I'll take the energy over the talking fast. Like the energy is where it's at. So you're
yeah.
good. Yeah.
But that opportunity for kids to have that, it gives teachers a chance to students can be independent in their learning, and they can say, I don't understand this. Can you explain this better to me? But then the teachers are providing this space where it's like, we know AI is there. We might say, oh, you can't use it, but we know that's not the reality, because even if they're not in our classrooms, they can have access to it. I mean, again, depending on their age. But if you provide these opportunities where you're modeling, like, this is appropriate use of it, this is how you can use it to enhance your learning, not to replace your learning process. And I think about it as, for teachers, it's, always the why behind using the technology. And then for students, when we look at it, oh, great, there's so many possibilities. But with all of those possibilities that are out there, we have responsibilities to make sure everything is, protected for them. And some of the tools take the information, they store them, they might share them with, whoever, I don't know, like the one that tracks, like, you just drove by this store. But there are some that do a lockdown of that information, and it's deleted after a certain time that you set, or it's a time set by them. But it gives kids a safe space where they can kind of explore and build those skills that they need, because, AI is either going to replace a job that they might be interested in, or it's going to take the place of a task that's a key component of a job that they're interested in. So they're going to need to know how to evaluate, how to use it and leverage it, just like we do.
So, yeah, I have like two questions that are very so we have to scaffold this appropriately, because like
Okay.
the last thing that you said, like with respect to jobs, or maybe where jobs are headed.
Yeah.
Because like I kind of think of this in like there's like two different like ways I think about this. And like on the one hand, there'll be jobs available, but there'll be jobs that don't exist yet, right? And we've said that
right.
quite often as educators, or at least I did with students. Or do you think there'll be such a replacement that there'll be just like a smaller job market, right? Where like there's just less of them. So I'm curious, like, what your take on, and I know it might be an impossible question too. So this is like mostly just like, sparking my own geeky, nerdy interest. Like it's kind of like, which way do we see this going, or will it maybe not matter because life will just be a very different thing?
Well, I think it's probably all of the above. I mean, like, if I'm being honest at this point, because, one thing that I would say, and I recommend too, is if you're looking to see, job trends and so forth. I mean, an example, and I read this a couple of years ago, and it's stayed pretty consistent, is there's an estimate of like 58 million STEM related jobs that are going to be needed by the year, I think 2026. They moved it to now. So there's that statistic. Other things that come up when you look at like trends in learning, artificial intelligence is the number one skill that's in demand now. Cybersecurity is one of those. And then if you go even further and you look at the World Economic Forum, who has the job skills outlook. And, every year I had the 2022, the 2025, and the 2027 is released. And most of them over even the past 10 years have stayed pretty consistent. All the 21st century, all the C's, the collaboration, critical thinking, and all of the things. And I won't take the time to put all those in. But if you look at the new one for 2027, Number three is AI and big data. And that's a thing. I mean, for something that was never on there to now all of a sudden it's number three, that's huge. And I did some research, as you know, I mentioned I'm working on the dissertation and I have some other writing that's coming out, but they did a survey. Amazon had done a survey, and I think they interviewed somewhere or surveyed somewhere around like over 3,000 different employees from, I don't know, 1,400 different organizations, just to see what their predictions and thoughts were based on what they had seen, what the trends are, you know, how things had changed in their business. And, you know, looking, I think 4 years out, it was over 90% were saying, yeah, you know what, by 2028, we're going to use AI powered solutions. And people that they interviewed thought pretty close to 90% that they were going to be using it in their daily work, which I think, I mean, we're all using AI at some point every day. And it might just be a simple Google search. Maybe you're looking for something on Netflix. And then even beyond World Economic Forum, like the McKinsey report that comes out with information. I think last year's report was talking about, I mean, the year 2030 has become like, it was 2025, now it's 2020 or 2030 for a lot of things. You know, you got the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but job skills and a decrease in loss of jobs. And they were talking about like the number of hours that are currently worked by people doing different tasks, which could be things like emails, communication, people who are, you know, financial advisors, for example, there's robo advisors, but they were predicting that up to almost a third of the hours currently, you know, that are worked in tasks like that can be and will be automated by AI, which I don't find that to be surprising either. So it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves. And the thing that I think about is, you know, all of the things, I mean, however long you've been in education or in your line of work, to think about big, like, oh my gosh, kind of technology moments, you know, like computers in classrooms. And then, wait, I can send an email to somebody, like they're going to get it like now, to I'm talking to you and you're like around the world, but I can walk through my house and I have terrible cell service. Like it doesn't make any sense how these things work. And since AI is such a hot topic right now, so many, I mean, all kinds of organizations, companies, individuals are focusing on building out these products that are beneficial. And I mean, a lot of them are seeing like, you know what, like this takes a ridiculous amount of time to do. There's better time spent, you know, as an educator working with students. You know, if I'm sitting there and I have a planning period and a student wants to come in and work with me one-on-one or, you know, whatever, and I'm like, you know, I got one planning period out of 8 or 9 periods a day. I got to do lesson plans, letters of recommendation, all the things. Well, if I can use AI to offset that, but, you know, students, I had a student who said, I wrote my whole essay using ChatGPT and I got an A. And I said, yeah, but what happens 5 years from now if you need to know that information for some reason? Like you're going to have to learn at some point. There's still that accountability. So it'll be interesting to see. And the point you said about, you know, the loss of jobs, like there will clearly be. And I forget, I had seen statistics and I think it was somewhere around, it was a really high number, like a loss of like 80 million. But then the creation of the number was higher, like 90 million, because it's just going to be the shift. And, you know, the jobs, I'm thinking, you know, you're looking cybersecurity, people who are programming, you know, the developers of different apps and things that are using the AI to create whatever, especially in different fields like healthcare, for example. Since 2020, that, I mean, there was this huge uptick in different areas, business, law, healthcare, automotive industry, financial industry, where it was just increasing because they were able to use that technology to facilitate and take care of processes that were you know, previously super time consuming. And I should stop, but you get me talking about these things, and I'm like,
no,
it's
like,
just fascinating.
yeah, and it's a wild can of worms, right? Like, of what what is. I guess looping back is that if you remember, I did have 2 questions.
I know you did. I just took up like 49 minutes on the one.
No, it's good. It's good. So, because I do know that you've done a lot of work and speak on, you know, like not just AI, but the virtual reality,
Yeah.
uh, VR and stuff like that. And so like kind of like hearing about AI, maybe students and people in general engaging, talking with not a human,
Hmm.
having headpieces on, right? And so I'm sure you're aware, like Apple, they're doing their big,
Yep.
marketing push with their big new technology.
Right.
People walking the guy that walked out of the Apple store with the big old box, uh, which that's a whole different conversation. Like that's wild. Like maybe that's like an
Yeah.
off-air conversation. But like, so how worried are you, or how worried do you think we should be in terms of human disconnection with all
Hmm.
this? And what could maybe we do as educators to, if they are going to embrace the AI, like where's the balance? Where's the
Hmm.
strategy with all that? Just curious what your thoughts are in terms of that possible human disconnection.
Yeah, it's that's a big, I mean, aside from, the privacy and the safety and all those kind of things and the ethical considerations, that over reliance on technology and, not talking in person. And one thing, that in my class I teach about a lot of things because it's emerging tech. So I got a pretty, open range there, but we talk about like the metaverse, for example.
Mm,
And is that good or is that bad? And there's always two different sides to something like that, right? Because some people may not have access to a learning experience or work because it's cost prohibitive or any number of reasons, and they can take advantage of that in something like the metaverse. When it comes to some of these different tools, I think, that was one of the struggles when we went to virtual learning when schools closed. It was like you really didn't have a choice because you had to rely on the technology because that's how you kept learning going and how work kept going and how you stay connected with family and friends. And then when you're back in the classroom, you're like, wait, do I ditch that? But it made you think about, I mean, for me, it made me think about, am I even like, do I know how to teach? Am I doing this right? What's the balance? And you could do a lot of different things. And I think when you figure out, the best way to figure it out is what, like I said, I might have said before too, because I've been talking so much, so I get it like all over the place. So excited with this, but you think about, you go into your classroom and like a typical period in your class with your students, how much time, aside from you talking like at them or to them and lecturing, how much time do you have for interactions with them or for them with each other? And
mm,
then if you peel back, okay, you take your part out of it, what else are they doing? Are they then interacting with each other? Are they using paper? Are you using technology? Um, and looking at that from like a different lens and then thinking, okay, so maybe I don't need to talk because this is what I did. I don't need to talk the full 42 minutes. I can have them do a quick game for 5 or 6 minutes. I can move around, interact with them for that time. They're done. They see the feedback. I see the feedback. And then I can pivot if I need to and give them instruction, or I can just do stations or whatever. And I think
mm,
with the AI or any of the emerging technologies and things, yeah, it does make it easier sometimes to like, you don't actually have to have a conversation with a person, or you don't have to sit down and type something. You get the voice to text, for example. You can generate presentations. You don't have to make those. But finding the balance, I think you have to do. And somebody had said like an 80-20 or something at one point, that was one thing. And I don't know if I'm about the 80-20, but with all things, you don't want to lose that connection with people. And Kevin Roose is an author who he's a New York Times columnist and an author, and he had written a book, Future Proof, and he talks all about automation and how the world is changing. And I had an opportunity to sit down with him at ISTE last June, and he did the closing keynote, and I sat down one-on-one, interviewed him, and I was like super nervous about it at first. I'd read his book before I went, but then we had a chance to just talk a little bit. And he brings up a lot of really good points in there. And even in a podcast that he had too, talking about, the technology and the use of all of these different tools, whether it's AI, whether it's AR, VR, anything like that, is breaking it down into two different sides, and I said this before too, the relational and the logistical. And when you can get rid of some of the things that are time consuming and the logistical and the clerical things. Because I ask teachers, I'm like, what takes up most of your time? They're like, grading. And I'm like, how many of you have like hours upon hours in the day where you're just sitting around like, I'm so bored? Like nobody. Meanwhile, the conference is like on a weekend because like weekends off. But you know, he brings up a valid point. Like, look at what you're doing, how you're using it, and are you using it as a substitution for when you have time where you could actually be talking with your students or talking with your colleagues or students with each other, then you might want to back off of that. Whereas if it's something that can be done and facilitated in faster time, that then gives you extra time to have that. But with that being said, the attorney brain in me is switching to the, well, you know what? You have some kids who are afraid to speak out in class, who may, you know, just are uncomfortable. They're lacking confidence. And there are tools out there that enable them to share what they're learning with their teacher in a way that's comfortable, using AI, for example, and then that helps them to build confidence. So sometimes it's kind of like that point, or that I don't even know what to call it, that thing that facilitates the, I'm not going to answer because I'm going to be wrong, or I'm embarrassed to answer. Then they can respond, and it helps them to kind of scaffold and build their skills to where they feel comfortable interacting with people. It shouldn't be a substitution. It should just be something that is offered as an enhancer or a facilitator of something. Um, and again, anybody listening, like if they listen to my podcast, I'm like, yep, it's Rachelle. She's just kind of, you know, off the cuff all over the place. But those are the things that go through my mind when I think about it, because sometimes I'll look at my class and I feel, gosh, did I just use tech the whole time? But sometimes it really is the best way because the kids have it in their hands. I'm explaining it. I get the feedback from it. So then I can think about how am I going to better prepare for them the next day. So I don't know.
And that's where, like, I always think about all this, like, because I think sometimes we think about the technology and the teaching as like these isolated things. And for me, did everything in my power, like how they're intertwined, right? Like, so like if I can do it like back in the day, like when I was in school, and be like, oh, is my teacher going to use the transparency today? Like, like this is a part of what was used, right? And we didn't think about it in those terms. We just knew that it was a part of a classroom. So for me, I was like, okay, so the Chromebooks, the tools, the all that stuff was just part of it. And for me, especially now, like like with AI and like all like just I guess the fears and the excitement, all of it.
Yeah.
My feeling is like, if I were to have a big fear of it, then I'm asking my students the wrong questions or asking them to do the wrong task, right? Like, and that's what I really loved about project-based learning, is that it really opened up doors for me to have a culture of like, no, students, I'm not going to tell you what to learn, but you're certainly going to tell me what you want to learn and what you care about, right? And so making it much bigger and much more nuanced and complex than, hey, here's just the right answer or the wrong answer. Who cares about that at a certain level? We have assessments and we have all that other stuff, but like at a certain level, I think education could be much more deeper than that, right? In the sense of like what they care about, what they want to solve, what kind of neighborhoods they live in, like what bothers them, what excites them, and really like a whole different level of personalization at that point. So yeah, Rachelle, we could really do, like, if we wanted to, and maybe no one wants this, we'd really have like a 2-hour episode. Because one final thing, and this happened with a previous guest, where I normally ask the big question, and we got to the point where we didn't have any more time. Like, oh, I guess this big question is going to be for next time. But to the best of our ability, so the big question I ask on the show is like, what is under the hat for you, right? Like perhaps like, and maybe it's a part of what was already discussed, but like, what is something maybe that excites you? What is something that maybe like does keep you up at night. Be like, wow, that's something we really need to address in education. But what is top for mind? What is top of mind for you right now? And perhaps what is something
Yeah.
that maybe we should be talking about?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot of things that are on my mind. It is probably because just coming back from IdeaCon, and we had a
Mm,
podcast that Sarah Candela did. It's the Optimalist, and she asked for some people to sit down. There were like 7 of us, and the topic was like resilience and helping students to deal with challenges and things like that.
mm,
And PBL came up in that as well. And we were talking about failure, and I mean for me AI is a big thing on my mind right now for multiple reasons. One, because it's everywhere. Two, because it's my dissertation that's finishing up in the next 2 months, I hope. But the other thing that's it's always on my mind is just the wellness of the kids and the
mm,
moments with the kids and checking in with them. And like I wasn't always like that. I was taught in a very different way, in a very different century at this point. And, the teachers cared about us and you knew that, but it was just, how you doing? Are you okay? Okay, here's class. But since law school and then seeing, the relationships and then the kids that pushed me and challenged me that I'm still connected with and all of that, it has
mm.
really helped me to kind of view things differently in my classroom. And I definitely care about teaching them Spanish and I want them to know the verbs. And it pains me greatly when I'm like, I've said this 59 times. And I even said to them a couple weeks ago, I go, okay, I need to teach you a lesson that is completely related to Spanish, but not related to Spanish. I said, there is a difference between hearing and listening. And
Mm.
I said, I know you people hear me, but you're not listening. Because if you were, you would be like doing this the right way. Um, and so just random things. But, with me, what you see is what you get. But I've realized Spanish is important. All their content areas are important. But who they are and what they feel and how they're doing are more important. I mean,
Mm.
and and people might disagree with me with saying that like they got to know the algebra, they got to know like for me, I always joke, I'm like I really didn't do well in algebra or geometry or a couple other classes, but what's been on my mind lately is just thinking about the students that I had in class that I don't have anymore, and making sure that I check in with them, getting to know my students and what they're bringing with them to school, because we don't always know their story. And I like to know the story. And clearly now, I like to tell stories too. But that's what matters to me. Do I want them to go on to be successful? Of course. Do I want them to remember Spanish and enjoy it? Absolutely. But I also want them to know that they matter and that I care and that they have somebody they can go to no matter what. And again, it wasn't always like that, but we don't know what the kids are coming to school with. And the smallest check-ins, like I had the student that I had last year write a note to me, a very long note, and it made me cry. Like the things that were said in that note about how they always felt comfortable coming to me. I was welcoming. I was never like judging. I listened. I cared. They could tell that I really cared about them, even if they, goofed off in class and stuff like that. But the fact that they took that of their own will to just write that note to me, like you never know. And sometimes you don't get that note. You don't know what a difference it makes. Just that hello to a kid each day. Um,
Yeah.
so education is important, but really getting to know our kids and letting them know us too. That's important as well. I mean, because they sometimes look at us as, oh, you're the expert, you know everything, you didn't struggle with anything. I'm like, let me tell you something. Like, oh yeah. And when you get older, you're still going to have challenges, and just being real. I think that's what matters the most, is being real and authentic with the kids. Um, Quirky, goofy, weird, all of the things. It's all good.
Yeah. No, that's certainly true, and that resonates with me. I spend a lot of time working with my students of like kind of talking about like, hey, let's break down
Mm-hmm.
this giant wall that exists between teacher and learners. Like this, I'm like this authority in the room.
Yeah.
And I would get that feedback, especially in the PBL process really facilitated this for me. But like,
Oh yeah.
they're like, wait, this doesn't even feel like a classroom and you don't even feel like a teacher. But
Nope.
what we're doing in here is cool. It feels like
Yeah.
we're all a part of this community, right? Which I always appreciated, and I always appreciated that feedback from my students. And so, yeah, awesome. All right. So we're like 5 minutes out. I really appreciate everybody that jumped in live. Appreciate all of you. We know, like, if you jump onto my website, underhatpod.com, that's where you find all the things, the links, the social links, where to access episodes, stuff of that nature. And so, Rachelle, like, if people are trying to find you, I do know that, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is it, right? In terms of like your
Yeah.
website and all the work.
Yeah.
Any other places that people should be aware? You're like everywhere. Like you're on Threads, you're on X, you're like, you may have like multiple accounts in like a given platform. Like it just seems like
Yeah.
you're all over the place. I think it's fantastic. Are there any other spots that maybe would be best to find you or to reach out to you?
Well, thanks to my parents, I was very original in creating like my email back in the AOL days. And so the Dené 915 is really first initial, middle name, and my birth date. So people can't forget 915. But if you
Nice.
want to connect with me in Threads, I'm not really that active. I usually just like everybody else's stuff, but it seemed like the thing to do. But Twitter/X, Instagram, Threads, it's all the Dené 915. You want to send me an email,
Awesome.
just add the Gmail. You can find me in all of those places. And the one that you shared, that's my blog site. And it has links there too and I take guest blogs. So if anybody out there is listening and you're like, I've been thinking about blogging or I have one, please send them my way because I would love to share your story. And, nobody wants to hear all about Rachelle. So send them on
No,
my
it's
way.
good. Yeah, no, it's good. Again, I really appreciate Rachelle, you being on.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
really respect the work that you do, and like your messaging, right? Really resonates with me. And so again, friends, reach out to either of us. I appreciate everyone sending me that love. This show is still in its early stages.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all the DMs, the willingness for people to come on and be a guest, subscribing, all that fun stuff. Until next time, though, I am at a conference, a little local conference this weekend, so I'm not doing a Saturday episode this weekend. Next week, I believe I have 2 episodes. And again, we're getting booked in till about through April. And so I'm excited for that. And Rachelle, when you need a guest, I'm here.
Yes.
So like, because I know that you have your own show,
Yeah.
and a really, really powerful show too, by the way. And so, yeah, thanks again, everyone. And as always, keep your hats on, but your minds open. Until next time, have a good evening.